welcome to Stillspeakpod. This is part 4 of the body cam footage series. In part 1 and 2, we covered the original body cam footage. And in part 3, we then covered the new one that just came out a few days ago. In part 3, we went halfway. This is the rest of it, and then this will be the end of the series. In the other one, I didn't really play clips of what was said of the body cam. I was sort of retelling it in my words rather than you listening to it, and then I would kind of chime in with what I had on my mind. And this one, I actually am going to play parts and pause and put my input. It'll just be a lot easier and a time saver to do that. So we left off where this officer, the bearded officer, called the witness, and then he walks over and he's talking to the other officer, the main officer. And at that point, they were still trying to figure out what to do, basically. It seems like this whole time they didn't know how to handle this. So now that they had their little talk, this is when he goes to Gabby to let her know she's the primary aggressor, and this is, what he has to do when she gets really upset and whatnot. So I'm going to play, and then I'm going to pause.
I'm going to speak to you frankly. I have a daughter almost your age, and I'm looking at you not so much like a suspect, but also as kind of a victim, in the sense that you're dealing with some struggles emotionally and mentally at your age.
Struggling emotionally and mentally at your age. While I do agree that 22 is a rough, age, you're still trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do and what have you, I'm not necessarily sure that you have emotional and mental issues at 22. I mean, it could be that she had emotional and mental issues because she was being abused. And that's why. But I don't think that necessarily every 22-year-old suffers emotionally and mentally. But let's continue.
Probably they'll work themselves out as you get older. There's a lot of angst at your age, and I remember being your age too. And hopefully it works itself out. But the stuff you did today that contributed to this, because you both contributed to this.
He says right here, you both contributed to this.
Is as a result of your inability to cope with the anxiety and the stress that you're having. So in a way, you're kind of...
Inability to cope with anxiety and stress. Well, for one, that seems kind of shame. Like he's shaming her for her inability to cope with anxiety and stress. And I also want to say this. I mean, I'm a great deal older than Gabby was, and I have a hard time coping with stress and anxiety, right? I know 70-year-olds who have issues with anxiety and stress and don't know how to cope. I think this is why we have so many people who become alcoholics or drug addicts, or they smoke, or whatever it is. There's so many of them, right? And it's a form of coping. Even an eating habit is a form of coping through stress. So, I don't know if this was necessary to say to her, because it's not actually abnormal for someone to not have good coping mechanisms to deal with high levels of stress and anxiety. And for all we know, her anxiety and stress actually could have been stemming from Brian.
I'm a victim of this. I think you would have done better if you had the skills to do better. But you don't learn skills until you learn skills, and you don't have enough life experience yet to know how to navigate everything. Like, I don't either, but I can navigate what happened. If I was in your shoes, I could handle it different, because I'm 39 years old. I've been through it. But I've got a lot of life lessons to learn still, because I'm like my dad and my grandpas, they know stuff I don't know, right? They can do stuff I don't know. So in a way, I'm just letting you know that we sympathize with you. But based on what you've said and based on what our witnesses said.
And you know what I'm going to say right now, right? I hope you do. Because if you know what I'm going to say, that means you've listened to my other videos about this body cam footage. Are you guessing right now? kidding. What did he say? He said, based upon what the witnesses are saying, and we've talked about this a bazillion times already, and that is that he never actually spoke to both witnesses. We never see him contact the witness who said that Brian was slapping and hitting her. He only called the other witness. Okay, so him saying that, based on both witnesses, because he uses an S, is actually not true. It's an actual lie. Now, did he intentionally lie? I don't know. That's up for debate. But it is a lie, nonetheless. But let's continue.
And even based on what your fiance has mentioned, trying his very hardest not to have you in any trouble.
And again, if you've been following all my videos on this, he never actually spoke to Brian. This officer never spoke to him. So the fact that he's saying, based upon what your fiance is saying, that's also not true, because he never spoke to him. And we actually never really see the other officer tell him what Brian was saying. There's like little bits, but not really. And so you have where he says both witnesses are saying, again, he didn't talk to either. Then he says based upon what Brian's saying, and that's, I wouldn't call that a lie, but I would say that that's not fully truthful because he didn't speak to Brian. And he's saying that what they mentioned and what you're saying, it all lines up. And then he says that Brian's trying really hard not to get her in any trouble. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. Again, he didn't really talk to Brian too much. He spent some time with him explaining how there's no discretion and they gotta charge her, blah, blah, blah. And, Brian made a joke that was an awkward and not funny joke about whether he can go to jail instead of her. I didn't really take him as being serious. I just took him as him saying that as like a nervous way to make a joke. Because then he's like, oh, I'll take your radio. Like he meant like, so you can charge me and I can go to jail instead of her. But it didn't seem serious. I don't think he really wanted to go to jail instead of her. So I don't really know what he's talking about with Brian trying his hardest not to get her in trouble when quite literally, as soon as he approached the van, Brian immediately blamed her and said, I don't want to try to defend myself, but she has a lot of anxiety and she had her phone in her hand. She was and she was swinging. So, trying his hardest not to get her in trouble. He threw her under the bus immediately. And then he went on to say, oh, she grabbed the steering wheel, da-da-da-da-da. Which, again, doesn't seem like he's not, trying to get her in trouble. You would think, if that was the case, that he would have taken all the blame for her. Or his story would have been a little bit different, or they would have needed to pry out of him what she actually did instead of him so willingly volunteering what happened immediately from the second this body cam footage begins.
He does have that witnesses say were caused by you slapping him. And that even you say...
Again, he says he does have marks on him that even the witnesses are saying was caused by you. Stop saying witnesses, Mr. Officer, man. Please, you're driving me nuts. I know that's like such a minor thing to seem like I'm focusing on that, but it's really important because he's misrepresenting the other witness, right? Because this other witness didn't have a full voice in the matter. He only had his call in. He didn't have any say in what ultimately happened here at all. And it's just not fair. So let's continue.
Slapped him and were aggressing him first. And I don't have anyone saying that he actually punched you aggressively. It sounds like it was shoving in a manner that was probably more consistent with trying to prevent you from entering the van or to get space from you, not to assail you.
So here he says, I don't have anybody who's actually saying that he punched you aggressively. Now, it's weird because sometimes words get used interchangeable. People use certain words for other things. Like a slap is not the same as a punch to me, right? But somebody might say a punch meaning a slap. So people all talk differently, right? So I would say shoving, slap, and punch are all different things. And what the witness that never got spoken to said was that Brian was hitting and slapping her. He didn't say anything about punch. And then I'm sitting here going, okay, so what if just because somebody didn't use the word punch, does that mean he wasn't hitting her? Like, what's this officer's definition of punch? And so then, again, he's saying, I don't have anybody actually saying that he punched you aggressively, but he didn't talk to the other witness. And then he talks about how it sounded like Brian was trying to prevent her from getting in the van. And I said this in my last video, this van thing and the fact that he wouldn't let her in the van seemed to be overlooked a great deal. If the tags were run, they would have saw it was her van. That's number one. Number two, since when is it okay, or why does he get to decide whether or not she gets in that van? Right? He was provoking her because he locked the van. So, and he tried to claim that, let's go take a breather, and he made it seem, and he even said, you go this way, I'll go this way, and we'll take a breather, blah, blah, blah. She said that after he locked it, he went for a walk, but the witness is saying he locked it, and then he got in the van. So you got three different, him and her have similar, but the witness that they actually spoke to gave a little bit different story here. And it seems this officer is overlooking that because basically how it's coming across is that Brian was the one to take control of the situation, and he was the one that decided that she needed to go for a walk and that she couldn't get in the van. And then to make her even more mad, because knowing that she wanted to get in the van, but he locked her out of it, he then gets in the van, making the situation 100 times worse. Because imagine that. Imagine your front door. Imagine somebody locks you out of your house, okay? And you're on the porch with the person. And they lock the door. And they won't let you in the house. You're like, let me in my freaking house. Let me in my house. Let me house. I'm not letting you in your house. I'm not letting you in your house. And then they open the door. And they go in. But they're not allowing you to go in. Would you not freak the hell out? Wouldn't you bang on the door, kick the door, scream, yell, ring the doorbell, and totally be pissed off? Because I sure as hell would. It's my freaking house. Let me in my freaking house. Right? So now, picture Gabby. They're fighting. They're clearly having issues. I think they were having issues since that morning, and this was 5 o'clock in the evening, because both of them kept mentioning morning, and I talked about this already. And so they're arguing. He tells her to calm down, shut up, etc. He then's the one to tell her to go calm down, go take a walk. These are all very controlling, bossy type of things. And then he's like, well, you're not getting in your own van. He locks the door, but then he gets in the van. So then what happens? She flips out and she starts trying to get into the van and claw her way. I mean, even the witness said it, clawed her way over him, which shows that he was in the van. Now, I said before, and I'll say it again, it's not illegal for him to lock her out of a vehicle, but this should have been a red flag for the officers to say, wait a minute, why did he think that he can lock her out of the van? Who gives him the right or control to do that? And then question, was this a control tactic? Like, I'm going to take control of the situation, I'm going to get in the van, but you're not allowed in it. And then take that thought process further. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. And again, they're cops, there's only so much they can do, right? But I'm doing this not to attack them, but to bring awareness. So now, think about Gabby in this circumstance where he's in the van, you would think that he was going to leave you, which would make it even worse. And you'd be scared, and you'd have a lot of anxiety, and you'd be freaking out. And this would go and match, because later we're going to talk about it. She gets really upset at the idea of being separated from him for the night. So if in the moment during their incident, she was feeling that same sense of anxiety, of separation from him, and fear that he was going to leave her, that's why you're getting the reaction that she gave. So, let's continue. Oh, before we do that, I forgot. And he says something to the effect of, like, no one said that he assailed you. But here's the thing. She did say that. She talked about him grabbing her face. I don't know. Maybe I'm old school or something. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure grabbing someone's face the way that she demonstrated he did is assailing and is aggressive. I don't see that as a defensive type of move to grab her face. Now, kind of bumping shoulders with her, even like slightly pushing her out of the way with his arms, fine. But grabbing her mouth, that is rather aggressive. I mean, there was really no need to do that when he could have simply she was so tiny, just simply got past her. You're going to tell me you couldn't get past her? That you had to grab her face? Nah. Give me a break.
If the tables were turned and he was beating on you and you were shoving him, of course we're going to look at it like, oh, of course she's defending herself to get away from this guy. Well, we're kind of looking at it the same way with him, and we have to treat both fair, even if he's a bigger male and you're a smaller female. The law doesn't say, hey, Officer Pratt and Officer Robbins, you can treat people different based on gender under the same. So we can, even if it makes no sense that you probably could not physically destroy this man the way that he could if he attacked you.
There's several things said during this interaction with this particular officer that are so, I don't know what the word is, foreshadowing, ironic. I mean, you can use all kinds of things, right? So here he's saying, you probably couldn't physically destroy this man the way he could if he attacked you. And you fast forward now 15 to 18 days later, and, well, hello, she's dead. So the fact that he said this and he says, you couldn't destroy this man, well, he ended up destroying her. And that's really sad. So it's kind of interesting that certain things that this officer says that actually turns out to be what happens.
We can't treat you different, okay? So all that long-windedness I'm giving you right now is leading up to the fact that if I pull someone over for speeding, I have the right to give them a warning. I have something called officer discretion. But in the legislature in Utah, they have made a law that if we have a domestic assault, they don't trust the police to make good decisions because too many cops have made bad decisions. So they say, we're not going to give you discretion. We're going to write a law that says if you have a domestic assault, whether it's male on female or female on male, whoever the primary aggressor is has to be charged. No choice. You don't get to give them a warning. It doesn't even matter if it's barely hurt at all and the guy doesn't want to press charges or the girl doesn't want to press charges. We don't have a choice. We literally have no choice. He does not want to press charges. He says you guys are a team. He says you're his fiance. He says he loves you. He says he doesn't want anything to happen. But we're explaining to him that we don't have any choice in this. So we're trying to get a local victims advocacy group called Seahaven to get him a hotel for the night so that you can have the van, because they won't give you the hotel because you're the one who is the primary aggressor. So they're going to consider him the victim, so they're going to get him a hotel. So he wants you so that you don't have to go to jail, because the only thing we can do is take you to jail. He says, well, so she doesn't have to go to jail, then I will accept Seahaven's help if they'll give me a hotel, and then she can have the van.
Let's talk about this for a second. Here's one of the things that could be the real reason why Brian didn't want her to be charged, or he didn't want to pursue charges against her. We know why she would defend him, but let's talk about Brian. Why wouldn't he, right? Well, here's the thing. If he did that, then he would be taking a risk that if he was abusing her, and he did abuse her that day and they lied, that if he did press charges against her, that would make her crack and tell the truth. So he's going to want to cover this up. He's going to want to make it seem like, no, we're good. Because he's not thinking about her. He's thinking about himself. And he's worried. And this goes back to when they first got stopped. And the one officer went to talk to Gabby. And when he came back, he was like, oh, did you talk to Gabby? And he had this look on his face like he was waiting to see what Gabby had said. He seemed worried. And then later he says something, I hope she didn't have too many complaints about me. So there was a concern there. So of course, if this situation was abusive, okay, and he was abusive, that he wouldn't want to do that because he'd be worried that she would then be like, well, actually what really happened was XYZ. Or if she went to jail for the night, that she might be able to get help and leave him, or get some type of shelter. Like she might confide in officers or guards and get some sort of help to leave him. We're going to continue, but I also wanted to say that, and at the next point where she realizes what's happening, she has a very big reaction to this. Like immediately just breaks down. And they start talking about her having to go. She's like, do I have to come back to Utah for her court hearing? And she's crying, and she's like, I don't know. And I think this big reaction says a lot. Here's the thing about abuse as well. There's usually ramifications. So it makes me wonder if this was an abusive relationship. And I keep saying if this was an abusive relationship because I believe that it was an abusive relationship based upon what we're seeing, and obviously the fact that she's now dead. But I am also not claiming to be an abuse expert. I just know a lot about it from people who have been in abusive relationships, and also from what I've seen in other cases and whatnot. And then also I've educated myself on it because I think it's a really important topic that everybody should educate themselves on. So if this was an abusive relationship, this idea that she, I told them that I caused this. It was my fault, right? And now because of that, we're in this situation. And now I'm going to have to possibly go to jail for the night. I'm getting this citation, and she's probably wondering what he's thinking, what he's feeling, and how he's going to react for this public situation that unfolded. So it's possible in this moment where she's having this emotional breakdown over the fact that she is in trouble, could be she's worried about what's going to happen and how Brian's going to react to that.
Have a ticket. When you get the ticket, it's going to give you a phone number to call, and they're going to give you a court date, and that court date will probably be online.
I have to go back to Utah?
No, it will be online. You have a smartphone?
Yeah.
So you can. I go to court. You're okay.
Sorry, I've never heard of this. I didn't know this was in Utah.
When COVID happened, they switched all the court from in person to online. So when I go to court now,
I have a ticket for hitting the curb or something, please, because we're okay. We're just.
I understand, but we don't have listen, if I had any discretion in this, I would separate you guys for the day and just give you warnings to stop hitting each other. But I lawfully don't have discretion here. I don't have any.
Because somebody said something, like a witness said something.
There's two witnesses. And then there's what you said when he said, and guess what? It all matches nicely that you were the primary.
Again, she says, is this because, somebody called or said something? And he was like, there's two witnesses. And her face was like so sad. And again, two witnesses, he's saying, when it's just the one that he had spoken to. And he says, the stories all match from, but again, that's not true. There's also doesn't seem to be much thought or consideration that it's possible that Gabby and Brian had discussed what they were going to tell the officer quickly before they got out of the vehicles. And that's why their stories match. So what I mean by that is, the cop was behind them for a short period of time, and then they hit this curb, and then he had to stop his car, he got to get out of his car, he's got to walk over to the vehicle, right? So there's a period of time, at least probably 2 to 3 minutes total if you add those things together. And in that 2 to 3 minutes, it could have been a very quick discussion on what they were going to tell the officers. And it's also possible that they saw outside the Moonflower that people had seen them fighting, because Brian even says, I didn't mean to make this so public. I was yelling, blah, blah, blah. So It could have been said. Brian could have said to her, you're going to tell them this. And there was enough time for him to say that to her. So there wasn't a whole lot of consideration here that the reason why the stories match is because it was already discussed. And she also doesn't want to be separated from him, and she blames her anxiety for that. But this could be, again, multiple things. It could have been worried about the ramifications, and it also could be that she had a trauma bond with him, and like the idea of not being with him was just too much for her to handle, because she starts like really freaking out in the car. You see her kind of shaking, and she's crying, she's taking really deep breaths, and she kept rubbing her legs over and over again to kind of soothe herself. And it's kind of funny because these officers, specifically this one, kept talking about we have no discretion. I mean, I don't know how many times he talked about there's no discretion here for officers. We can't make the decision. If I pull you over for drinking and driving, I can have discretion over whether or not to give you a ticket, blah, 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 right? But then this entire time, all he's doing is discussing how to handle it and trying to kind of like figure out like, okay, if we get him to stay in a hotel, then she don't have to go to jail. So, I mean, you do sort of have discretion. You keep saying you don't, but you sort of do, because you're saying like you have no choice but to charge her and give her a citation or take her to jail, or both. But then you're trying to figure out a plan for that not to happen. So there's somewhat of discretion there, officer. I'm just saying. And then Gabby's like, we're a team, please, please. And so there's this begging of, please don't do this, please. Now, a lot of people beg around officers, right? That's not a huge red flag, but in the context of the story, and if we're looking at this as abuse, saying we're a team, again, that's that trauma, we're a team, trauma bond. And it's also the begging fear of, getting a citation is not that big of a deal. For her to have such a huge reaction like she did over a citation and a court date online, it seems kind of ridiculous, right? Like, it's not really that big of a deal. Now, if they were like, we're carting you off to jail, then I would be like, okay, you could freak the hell out, because who the hell wants to go to jail for the night at 100, this small young girl at 105 pounds. But this was over getting a citation, having to appear online for court, and being separated from him. And she's like hyperventilating over this trauma bond. And earlier in part 3, we talked about it. They're talking about her wounds. He's actually the one that pointed out her wounds. She had 2 on her face and 1 on her shoulder, according to him. That's not just from what we're seeing. That's what he's saying. I also saw a red mark on her arm, sort of near where your elbow is. Like somebody had grabbed her arm. It was all red. And then that's when she initially blames the backpack. Like, oh, maybe the backpack did something to me. And then she later, said that he grabbed her face. But then she said, well, I hit him first. So she blamed herself. She blamed the backpack, etc., to explain these marks on her. And when the officer was talking to her earlier, before this, I just stopped it, he was saying, well, he's got marks on his face. And he never goes back to the fact that she also has marks on her face. Now, he already did acknowledge it, right? But it was kind of like after she gave an explanation as to why she had marks, then her marks no longer mattered, because her marks happened because she attacked him, because she was the primary aggressor. So this is why he's ignoring the fact that she also has marks on her at this point.
Aggressor, and that the injuries he has were caused by your aggression towards him. Even if he doesn't feel hurt, even if he doesn't want to press charges, there's nothing any cop can do about it. It's written into the law.
I don't.
Normally we take people to jail, but he's trying to work it so you can just have the van. Tomorrow,
I don't want to be separated.
You gonna have anxiety?
Yeah, no, we're a team, please.
There's no one? What is it?
No, Mike, we're a team, please. It's gonna give me so much anxiety. Can we send me like a driving
Okay,
ticket?
the very best thing I can do is call my supervisor and see if I'm missing something here.
Because if I'll pay any driving ticket, a parking ticket, anything.
Okay, Gabby,
If that'd be
Gabby,
better,
try to calm down, and I'm gonna go call a supervisor. But I don't think that there's much I can do, but let me see if a supervisor can tell me something I'm missing to make
I
this not
can't
happen.
feel overhead. I couldn't handle that. I'm sorry.
Just give me a minute.
I said this in another video. I believe it was part 2. I want to say it again because that was a different officer I was talking about. She just told these people, she told 3 officers that the whole reason why she was upset to begin with was because he told her to calm down. Yet 2 out of 3 officers told Gabby to calm down, when she just expressed that he did that to her. Brian did that to her as well. So now you can say, well, that backs up Brian, and it backs up these officers that she wasn't the one, that she was the one that wasn't calm, and so he was reacting to her not being calm. Okay, fine. But you can also say, like, can we not tell this girl to calm down when she's expressing to you that this is why she was upset to begin with? But whatever. And, she's having a very big reaction to being separated from him, and I want to discuss that because we now learned for sure, we knew before, but now it's a fact. Brian went home from August 17th to August 23rd. So almost an entire week, depending on what time he left and what time he got back. Now, she didn't stay in the van, but she was alone, as far as we know, in a hotel in a city she didn't know and wasn't familiar with, okay? And I said last night in a different video that I'm not believing for a single second that they paid for a hotel and a flight for him to go to Florida to empty out a storage unit to save money. That makes no sense because the hotel alone for 7 days would have been roughly $500 to $700. Then you have the plane ticket. Depending right now, the prices are rather high, or they're back to being high. They were low for a while. So you're talking about a $300 plane ticket. So you're talking about $1,000 for him to fly home to empty a storage unit when he could have just mailed his parents the key to the storage unit, asked them or his sister and brother-in-law to do it. That doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm not buying that the only reason he went home on the 17th through the 23rd was to empty this unit. There's more to this. Now, in the context of this event, this was on the 12th, and 5 days later is when he flew out. And I also said in the video that Gabby nor Brian mention him going to Florida. In this moment where they're talking about how they've been fighting a lot and they're spending a lot of time with each other, neither one of them mention, as far as we know from these body cam footages, that Brian was going home to Florida for a week. And I said, I feel like it wasn't planned. And one of the other explanations was that they were emptying the storage unit because they were considering extending the trip, which also doesn't make any sense because clearly you guys are having a lot of issues. It boiled to the point where you got stopped by the police, and just within a few days you're deciding to possibly extend a trip, and now you, based upon a possibly extending of the trip, you're going to fly home and pay hundreds of dollars, maybe $1,000 to go do this. So there's definitely more to this trip, and it makes me wonder how Gabby was in the hotel by herself for a week. Now, we do know her father spoke with her. He talked about ordering her a pizza, but she's having a really big reaction from being apart from him. And so it does make me wonder if that trip on the 17th was that they broke up, and that possibly he had spoken to her several times over that week, and, she was having such a reaction to him being gone that he decided to go back to her. And I wouldn't expect Gabby to tell her parents that, because she wouldn't want to worry them. She wouldn't want to say, oh my God, me and Brian broke up and he took a flight home and I'm out here in Salt Lake City by myself. I can see her not wanting to tell them and worry them. So it does make me wonder, because I don't know, this girl really did not want to be apart from him and was having literally breathing issues in the backseat of this vehicle. She was hyperventilating big time. So he goes in his vehicle, okay, and he calls a supervisor, and he starts telling him, I have this couple, she's super young, she's like 105 pounds, soaking wet, it was like a slap fight, I don't know, what should we do? And he's basically asking if there's a way around this to try to help her out. And he's like, I don't know if you're going to get in trouble if we don't do it this way. And what he meant was if they don't follow the actual statute in the law and something happens later, are they going to get in trouble for not handling it the way that they were supposed to be handling it? This is another one of those foreshadowing or ironic moments, right? Because now they've come under great fire about this incident and how it was handled. And so he's saying, I don't know if we want to do it this way because we don't want to get in trouble. Well, now there's an investigation about this. So it's kind of ironic. He then hangs up the phone. He's like, I'm going to, look up at the statute and see if there's a way around it, basically. And then the other officer walks over to his window. And he's like, how far do you want to take this? He's like, because here's why the law, exists. And he says, too many times women, this is crazy to me, this is his exact words, too many times women at risk want to go back to their abuser. They just wanted him to stop. They don't want them to go to jail or want to separate. Then things get worse and they end up being killed. Now, why this is interesting is he's explaining it as for women when he before was saying that they can't, discriminate based upon gender. But he's talking about giving like an example basically of why the law exists. But what he says in here describes her, yet he's calling her the aggressor. So listen carefully. He says, too many times women at risk want to go back to their abuser. Boom. Right there. She doesn't want to be separated. She wants to be back with him. Okay? They just want him to stop. Well, if she was being abused, then she'd want him to stop. Plus, she did say that she wanted him to stop telling her to calm down and stop telling her to shut up. And she wanted to get back in the vehicle. So this is why she reacted. And then he says, they don't want to go to jail, them to go to jail, which we know that, she wouldn't have wanted him to go to jail, right? She definitely wouldn't have. She didn't even want to be separated from him. So there's that. Or want to be separate. Again, she didn't want to separate from him. Things get worse and they end up being killed. What happened? She ended up being killed. So his own example he used to this main officer, even though it was an example of why the law exists, and even though he was calling her the aggressor, actually shows in just this example that she was the one abused. And yet he didn't pick up on that. He didn't make that connection. He didn't. And that's really sad. So then he says, we have to figure out if she intended to hurt him. Which, I think anytime you hit somebody or something to that effect, yeah, you're intending to hurt them, right? You're not like, I'm just going to hit you and my intent isn't to hurt you. Typically, it's you mean to hurt them. And he says, you have to go ask her that. And whatever she answers to that question will seal her fate. Again, foreshadowing. Because she said, I didn't intend to hurt him. I wanted him to stop telling me to calm down. So that did seal her fate. It did. Why? Because by answering the question that way, it got her out of a citation, it got her out of going to jail, it got her out of, which at this point they already decided she wasn't going to jail. So really, it got her out of a citation and And then she ended up having to be separated from him, but she was able to be reunited with him like maybe 12, 13 hours later by the next morning, right? We don't know what time they got back together, but it was only supposed to be for the night. And by being back together with him, they were able to continue on with their trip, which then resulted in her death later. So then the officers are talking again. Now the female park ranger lady comes over and they're still talking. They're having all this talk about what to do. And it's just like funny to me because it's like you keep talking about this no discretion, but you're still making a choice on go all the way, go halfway, go little of the way, like you're trying to figure out how far you want to take this. So there is some sort of discretion. This might be an exception to the rule given the situation, but you keep saying there's no discretion, and clearly there is some form of discretion here. And then the main officer, who's the one who has to make the final decision and who's kind of conducting all of this, he says, I don't know, it's a headache if I go left, or it's a headache if I go right. And he's standing around, he's thinking, what he's trying to say here is that, if he goes full on them and follows the law to a T, it's a headache. And if he just kind of lets them go, it's a headache. And I kind of feel for him in this moment. This is the main officer, not the bearded officer who kind of gets on my nerves. Because think about how he's feeling now, right? Even if it's not his fault, or even if this had not been handled the way it was handled, there's still most likely the thought process in his head of like, I felt bad for them. I felt sympathy for them. They were young and I decided to handle it this way. And if I didn't handle it that way, would she still be alive? And so I kind of feel sympathy for him because I can't imagine what's going through his head now, because he recognized and he was concerned about getting in trouble. He was concerned of like, if I go this way or if I go this way, I'm basically screwed, right? So it's you just got to pick one. And he might be in his head wondering if he made the wrong choice. So this is a really terrible situation, right? So at this point, the beard officer gets a call about some drunken man, and he ends up leaving. And so the main officer takes over, and what we ultimately find out is that he doesn't give her a citation. He just lets her take the van, and Brian goes to a hotel. And we don't know if Brian stayed at the hotel all night, if they reunited, if she came to the hotel. We don't know if she stayed at the hotel. We don't know any of that. She seemed very concerned about going off on her own. She looked very scared and nervous about that. There's a lot of talk about them having money, especially they would have had money to do this flight and hotel just a few days later. And yet we don't know if she stayed in a hotel that night rather than stay in the van. I don't know. We don't know. Maybe we'll find out later. Hopefully we'll find out later. It might be quite some time now. So I just did a timeline video. I put it up earlier today. It's got no audio. It's just visual. And it's to some music, and I just put the things that I felt were important. There's been a lot of other little things that weren't really necessary to put on there. And in that, I kind of break down each day after this. So it starts from August 12th and then goes to October 5th. So check that out if you didn't see it already. But you have this incident on the 12th. They most likely got back together by the morning. So you got the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th, which we don't really know what was going on those days. And then 17th is when he leaves, so this is 5 days later. And then you have him gone the 17th, the 18th, the 19th, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd, depending on what time he got back. And we know that they checked out of the hotel on the 24th. And then they went to head towards Grand Teton. They stopped in Ogden. She took the butterfly picture that she posted on her social media. That was the last post that she ever made. And from there, things start to get murky, because then you have witnesses from the 26th, there's several of them. Then you have the 27th, which was the restaurant. Here's my thing that's getting me all caught up here. I don't think that trip home was planned, like I said, because I just feel like either of them would have mentioned it when they were talking about getting a break from one another. And they didn't do that, which was the perfect opportunity to do that. Either way, they got a break from each other for 7 days. 7 days. So if that didn't actually happen, you can look at this and go, there was a boiling point, right? So they had this incident on the 12th, and they were arguing more, blah, 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 for the next 2 weeks, boil, 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 and then boom, things got really bad, which ended in her death. This 7-day break, that's a long time, 7 days. Well, some weeks it doesn't feel that long, but you know what I'm saying. But that was a 7-day break from one another. And then he comes back, so now you have the 24th, the 25th, the 26th. And it seems to me that she died on the 27th. We don't know that for sure, though. But the 27th is when their van was spotted on the road that ended up being where her body was, not far from that area. So it kind of lines up to be the 27th. We don't really know what he was doing on the 28th. There's people who claim that he was hitchhiking on the 29th. I did a whole video on why I don't believe the hitchhiking claims. It could be true. Right now, I don't believe it. And then we know that on the 30th, 31st, and the 1st, he used her credit card. And we also know that in order for him to get back to Florida at 10:26 a.m., he would have needed to be gone from Grand Teton area by that evening on the 30th. So she died somewhere between the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, and portion of the 30th, okay? That's if he drove straight through and he didn't leave immediately after and just make some stops along the way. We don't know. These are the unknown areas. But if you just went off the 27th, that was the day that she died, right? That's only 3 days after he got back. 3 days. That it almost gives this vibe of premeditation. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I do think that there was probably an argument and something, unfolded and it resulted in her death. That being said, I can't take premeditation off the table here because of this time frame. So let's say from the 12th to the 27th, that's 15 days. So 15 days later, this girl that we see in this body cam footage, this puffy-eyed, bloodshot eye, crying, hyperventilating, rubbing her legs girl that we see, who looks so alive, so emotional, is dead. She only had 15 days left to live on this planet from this point that we're seeing her in this body cam footage, which is heartbreaking. And 7 of those 15 days, he wasn't even there. So now it boils down to 8 days, right? And so then you had 5 days before he left and 3 days after he came back. I don't know. It smells like premeditation to me. I would love to know her cause of death. I'm hoping we get that soon, because I think the cause of death is going to fill in a lot of gaps, answer a lot of questions, and will help with the series part of this and whether or not it was a snapped or a premeditated type of situation. And I say that because, if it was strangulation, we can assume that they were arguing, he lost his mind and started strangling her. If she was smothered, it can be either. It was a snap situation. There was something right there, like her sweatshirt, and he used it to suffocate her. Or it could be that he suffocated her in her sleep if they were out there camping. If she was beat, it'd be more of a situation where it was snapped versus premeditated. Because if you're going to premeditate to kill somebody, typically, I'm sure it happens, but typically you don't beat them to death. You use some form of weapon or what have you. So that would definitely fill in those things to me, but there really doesn't seem to be a boiling point now. It could be that 7 days did absolutely nothing for them, And he got back, and they just continued to argue excessively, and, you know, it led to this point. It just seemed insane to me that break wouldn't have helped in some way. I've been in a relationship for most of my life, and seriously, more than half of my life. And, you know, sometimes you go through cycles of just like constant fighting, right? Just constantly getting on each other's nerves, and or always around one another, and then you get that break, and it kind of just renews everything. And the fact that it clearly didn't do that for them just is odd. So now there's 2 other officers whose body cam footage we didn't see. And there was a lot of complaints when the second one came out, because in the first one, it was bad, but it wasn't as heartbreaking as the second one. In the second one, we actually see her more defending him, more making excuses for him, more trying to blame herself, more of her trying to blame other things other than him, etc. And where she actually admits that he did hit her or grabbed her, because she's like, well, yeah, I guess, but I hit him first, which is just a way to downplay, but it also confirmed that he did hurt her or grabbed her, pushed her, slapped her, whatever. And, you know, people were like, why didn't we see this one first? Or why didn't this one come out at the same time as the other one? Because it gives a totally different, view or story. To me, they're somewhat pretty much the same thing. One was just more heartbreaking than the other. So they got a lot of backlash for that. But in the meantime, this new one was released 5 days ago. The first one was released when she was still missing. And we still have the 2 other officers' body cam footage that we have not seen. Now, I believe the park ranger female has one. She did a slight interview where she says that she has not watched the footage yet. And I took it as that she's not ready emotionally to watch her footage yet. We haven't seen hers. And we didn't see the other one. The other one I never actually saw go speak to Gabby. He may have, but I don't actually ever see him do that. It seems that he was mostly focused on Brian. But that would be really insightful, because when they were over talking to Gabby, this particular officer was talking to Brian a lot while Brian was sitting on the curb. And I'd like to see if his story changed from what he had told one of the other officers. And I say that because this officer that was talking to Brian while he was sitting on the curb actually says to the main officer, I was trying to get some consistencies in the story, which meant that he was noticing that Brian's story wasn't consistent, and he was trying to get some consistency. So I'd be really interested in seeing his. I'd also like to hear from these officers. I know why they're waiting, probably because of the investigation, but I would like to see how they're feeling, how they're doing mentally with all of this. And again, I'm not doing this to beat them up. I don't agree with a lot. One officer really bugs the hell out of me, and I've made that very, very clear. That's just a personal opinion. I'm just doing this to bring awareness to things that were signs of abuse and what to look for. So now some final thoughts is there's a thing called reactive abuse. So it's basically reactive, right? You scream and fight back and what have you. It's kind of your body's defense mechanism to attacks. And the issue with it is that the abuser, the actual one that's abusive, wants reactive abuse. Why? Because it gives them proof. Why does it give them proof? Well, it proves to them that the victim is unstable, mentally ill, or delusional. So what does that mean? So remember when Brian was like, oh, she's just crazy. When he was asked if, she takes any medication, he's like, oh, she's just crazy. So it was proof that her reaction to him was proof for him to blame her, the victim, and be like, see, she's mentally unstable. She's mentally ill. She's, crazy. She's just crazy. because he also immediately talked about her anxiety when the bearded officer got to his window. Well, she's got anxiety and she was swinging. So, he was like, she's the crazy one. So they kind of hold the victim's reactions against them and make them the one, like, you're crazy. And you start to believe you're the one that's crazy, that you're the one who has the issues. You're the one who causes the problems. You're the one who's mean. And you recall Gabby talking about apologizing for being mean. And then any time in abuse, you have periods of remorse or where things are good. And it can lead to a trauma bond because it gives you false hope that the abuser has changed their ways, and then it happens again. And not to mention that somebody who's being abused is made to think that they're actually the abuser. They start to feel a sense of responsibility to remain in the relationship and fix their ways. Okay? And those who have experienced reactive abuse also sustain a large amounts of stress, anxiety, and depressive symptoms based on the severity or the length of it all. And again, Gabby said anxiety and stress. Brian said her anxiety. So her actual anxiety and stress might not have been an age thing like the officer was trying to say. It may have not been that she actually had anxiety, like an anxiety condition, but that he was actually causing her stress and anxiety. And generally, when a trauma bond is formed is when the abuser becomes the main source of support for the other partner, and this makes the partner then turn to them for love and comfort when it's needed. Now, Gabby seemed to be very loved by her family. I mean, very loved. You can feel it amongst her 4 parents. So I don't think that she needed love from Brian. That being said, they were isolated to one another. All she had on this trip was him. Now, she could have called her parents, sure, but she was still isolated to him physically on a daily basis in this small little van on this road trip. So, the bond could have been formed over the course of this trip because she relied on him to always be there for her, to not leave and abandon her, to care, for her, to love her, to keep her safe, etc. And this can be the reason why she also didn't want to be separated from him, because he was a sense of security, because she had been isolated to only him for so long. So, and it's funny because I looked up typical sayings that an abused person in a trauma bond might say, and I'm going to say them and kind of relate to what Gabby said. So one example was, quote, he only acts this way because he loves me so much, unquote. Quote, he's the love of my life and I won't leave him, unquote. Another one, quote, I make them angry, so it's my own fault, unquote. So right here alone, he's the love of my life and I won't leave him, was she didn't want to separate from him. Her saying, we're a team, it's all good, we're a team. I make them angry, so it's their own fault. We heard Gabby saying, well, he got really frustrated with me because of my anxiety, and I did hit him first. So she was definitely saying things that line up with just examples of what somebody in a trauma bond would say. But that's just a few examples, and unfortunately, like I said before, and I'll say it again, talking about this doesn't help her. She's gone. It does help other people, and everybody should be educated on this. I cannot believe the amount of uneducated comments I've seen about this video. It's actually really unsettling, and so I'm hoping to change somebody's mind. Somebody out there needs to hear this for some reason. I'm trying to reason with them and make them see where the signs were and what was happening. And you don't always see it right there, right? You don't always do. So all we can do is look for it. And if we see it, then we do something that we can help them. And on a final note here, this girl didn't want to be separated from him to the point of hyperventilating. And he most likely killed her. Let's face it, the chances that he didn't is pretty slim, although there is still that possibility. And he had no problem leaving her dead by herself in the wilderness, like her parents called it. He had no problem driving 35, 36 hours without her, coming back home, not telling anybody, not helping find her, and no problem hiding from the consequences of his actions. So that's the tragedy in itself, is that she didn't even want to be apart from him, and he didn't really seem to care at all about her. Maybe at one time, but certainly not at this time. And I do see some people saying that they were both toxic, that Gabby wasn't perfect. Listen, I'm one of the first people to say that victims are not saints, that they're not angels, that they weren't perfect. Believe me, I am. I get a lot of slack for that because sometimes victims are not good people. I mean, that's just the reality, and sometimes it needs to be discussed if it matters to the context of the story. In this particular instance, the people that are saying, they were both toxic, well, I get why you might be thinking that, but there's also could be the other explanation here that they weren't toxic, meaning separate, but that he was being abusive and she was having reactive abuse. So she was reacting to the abuse. And this is why it might come across to you like she was also toxic. But in reality, she could have been psychologically, mentally, emotionally screwed in the head because of what was happening to her, and therefore was having the anxiety and the reactions that she was having. So I hope you consider that instead of automatically assuming that they were both toxic and, maybe she provoked him and he ended up killing her and it was self-defense. Because again, I say to you, this girl was 105 pounds. Self-defense, are you kidding me? And unless she was trying to hit him with a car, unless she had a gun or a knife and she was trying to attack him, self-defense, physically, when she had no weapon of any kind, give me a break. And from what we heard from her stepfather in the Dr. Phil show today, actually, it does not seem that van was anywhere near where her body was. So she definitely wasn't using that. We don't know if they had a gun on them, and we don't know if they had some sort of knife, which I'm sure they did because they were camping and they were cooking and stuff like that. So that's a slight possibility. But as far as he couldn't defend himself against her slapping him, give me a break. I'm sorry. Come on. Please. On that note, I'm going to wrap it up and call it a night. And until next time, I'll see you soon.